Halfway through the toast of my own wedding, a woman I had never met in my life stood up at the back of the room, asked, very politely, for 1 minute of everyone's attention, and then told 200 people exactly what I did to her husband 9 years ago. She wasn't wrong about a single word of it. I want to tell you this story in order, because the order is the whole point. If I start with the wedding, you'll think this is a story about a stranger ruining my life. It isn't. This is a story about the 9 years I spent quietly letting someone else pay for something I did, and about the one night all of that finally came due, in front of everyone I loved, in the middle of the happiest day of my life. I was 24 when it happened, working my first real job as a reporter at a mid-sized metro newspaper, the kind of place where you cover school board meetings for 2 years hoping someone finally lets you write something that matters. I was ambitious in the specific, hungry way you only are before you've been humbled by anything. I wanted the story that made my name, and when it finally landed in my lap, a tip about corruption in a major downtown development deal, kickbacks, a city council member who'd quietly gotten rich off a project he was supposed to be regulating, I did not treat it with the caution it deserved. I treated it like a door I've been waiting my whole life to walk through. My editor on that story was a man named Ben Whitfield. Ben was 46, a 20-year newsroom veteran, the kind of editor young reporters either feared or worshipped, and I did both. He was rigorous in a way that used to frustrate me. He'd send a draft back 4 times over one unverified sentence. But he believed in the story, and more than that, I think he believed in me. He put his name on it, as the supervising editor. He vouched for it to the paper's lawyers. He told the editor-in-chief, in a meeting I wasn't even in, that he'd stake his reputation on my reporting. Here's the thing I did, and I'm not going to soften it. I had one source, a former contractor on the development project, who gave me the single most damning detail in the entire story, a specific dollar figure tied to a specific bribe. I cannot get a second source to confirm that number. Every experienced reporter reading this already knows what I should have done. I should have gone back to Ben, told him the number was single-sourced, and either found more confirmation or run the story without it. Instead, with the deadline 8 hours away and my entire career feeling like it hung on that one number, I did something smaller and worse than a lie, which somehow made it easier to tell myself it wasn't one. I let the ambiguity stand. I wrote the number into the story with confident, declarative language that implied a level of certainty I did not have. Ben read the draft. He asked me, directly, "Is this number solid?" And I said yes. The story ran on a Sunday. It was, for about 4 months, the best thing that had ever happened to me. It won a regional award. I got a byline on the front page for the first time in my career. Other papers picked it up. I was, at 24, the reporter who'd taken down a corrupt councilman. Then, for months later, the contractor recanted. Under oath, in a deposition connected to an unrelated lawsuit, he admitted he'd exaggerated the number to make himself look more important to the investigation. The actual bribe, while real, was roughly a third of what I'd printed. It was still a real scandal. The councilman still resigned. But the specific, damning number that had made the story a sensation was wrong. And it was wrong because a reporter had printed something he wasn't sure of and told his editor he was certain. The paper needed someone to blame publicly, fast, to survive the retraction and the lawsuit threat that followed. And here's the moment this story actually turns on. Not the wedding, not the toast, this moment, in a conference room 9 years before any of that. I was in that meeting. Ben was in that meeting. The editor-in-chief asked, directly, whose failure this was, mine, for the reporting, or Ben's, for the editorial sign-off. And I had, sitting right there in my chest, the true answer. I had told Ben the number was solid. It wasn't a shared failure. It was mine, dressed up as his, because he had trusted my yes. I said nothing. I let the silence answer for me. And in that silence, the paper's lawyers and the editor-in-chief did what silence always lets people do. They filled it with a version that was easiest for everyone except the one person it actually hurt. The story became that Ben, the senior editor, should have pushed harder, should have demanded a second source himself instead of taking a junior reporter's word, should have caught what he didn't catch. Ben was quietly, formally reprimanded. And when the lawsuit costs mounted 6 months later and the paper needed layoffs anyway, Ben's name was at the top of the list, framed internally as a performance issue rather than what it actually was, which was a debt I owed and let him pay. I did not lose my job. I got, within a year, a promotion. I want you to sit with that because I've had to. A man lost a 20-year career over a mistake that was mine, and I was promoted in the same building, walking past his old office, which had my old mentor's nameplate removed from the door within a month. I told myself things the way people always do, that it wasn't entirely my fault. Ben was the editor. Editors are supposed to catch things. That coming forward wouldn't have saved his job anyway. It would have just cost me mine too for nothing. That enough time had passed that reopening it would only hurt more people. Every one of those sentences was a small, private lie I told to make a large, public one feel survivable. Ben, I later learned, much later from Nora on the worst night of my life, never worked in journalism again. The industry is smaller than people think, and a senior editor pushed out over an editorial failure doesn't quietly land somewhere else. The story travels ahead of him. He tried freelance work for a while. He and Nora went through their savings. Nora told me, that night, in a voice that had clearly rehearsed this for years, that Ben had gone from the most respected man in that newsroom to a man who couldn't get a call back from a community weekly, and that watching that happen to him for 2 straight years had been the thing that finally ended their marriage. Not one dramatic fight, just a slow financial and emotional bleed that neither of them had the resources left to stop. I built a career on the ashes of that. I moved into communications, then into a director-level role at a national outlet, then into the kind of quiet, comfortable success where people ask you to speak on panels about journalistic integrity, and you say yes, and you mean every abstract word of it, and you never once mention the one time it actually mattered and you failed. I met Grace 4 years ago. She is genuinely the best person I have ever known, funnier than me, kinder than me, the kind of person who makes you want to become the version of yourself she already seems to believe you are. I told her about the Harrow Street story the way I'd told everyone for 9 years, as a cautionary tale about the industry, about how my editor hadn't pushed hard enough, a story where I was the young reporter who'd learned a hard lesson about the business, rather than the man who'd let someone else absorb his failure. She believed the version I gave her, because it was the only version she'd ever heard, and because I said it with the specific practiced ease of something I'd repeated so many times I'd nearly started to believe it myself. We got married on a Saturday in October, at a small venue outside the city, with rain starting just as the ceremony ended. The kind of rain everyone insists is good luck. 200 people. My parents. Grace's whole enormous family. It was, until roughly 9:15 that evening, the best day of my life. I didn't know Nora Whitfield was in the room. I would learn later that she'd seen the wedding announcement, a small item in the paper's own society page, the kind of quiet irony you couldn't invent on purpose, and recognized my name immediately. She told me, months afterward, that she almost didn't come, that she'd spent 2 days deciding, and that what finally decided it for her wasn't anger, exactly. It was watching from the announcement photo how happy and unbothered I looked, and understanding that I had never once, in 9 years, carried any visible weight for what happened to her husband. She said she didn't come to ruin my wedding. She came because she'd realized I was going to go my entire life without a single moment where the truth was said out loud in a room I couldn't control. She stood up during the toasts, the open microphone portion, right after my father spoke, and she asked calmly for 1 minute. The room, expecting a friend or a co-worker, went quiet and warm and expectant. I remember Grace squeezing my hand under the table, smiling. Nora said my name, then Ben's. Then she said, in a voice that was steady in a way that told me she had said these exact words to herself in a mirror more than once. 9 years ago, this man let my husband take the blame for a lie he told. My husband lost his career. We lost our marriage. I don't know most of you, and I'm sorry to do this today of all days, but I have watched this man's name in the paper for 9 years, every award, every promotion, and I needed one room, one time, to hear what actually happened. So now you know. And then she sat back down. I have relived the next 4 seconds of silence more than any other moment of my life. Every version of myself I'd built for 9 years was standing at the front of that room with a microphone still faintly humming in the stand behind me. And I understood with total clarity, exactly 2 choices. I could do what I'd done 9 years ago. I could let the silence, or a calm denial, or a quiet, we can talk about this later, do the work of protecting me one more time. Or I could finally do the thing I hadn't done in that conference room, when it actually would have cost me something real. I picked up the microphone. I told 200 people, including my new wife, that every word Nora Whitfield had just said was true. I told them about the number I wasn't sure of. I told them I told Ben it was solid when it wasn't. I told them I sat in a room and let a man I respected more than almost anyone take a fall that was built entirely out of my own silence, and that I had spent 9 years being rewarded for a story that broke a good man's life in half and had never once tried to fix it. I will not pretend the rest of that night was anything but wreckage. Grace did not speak to me for the length of the reception. She stood and thanked people and functioned with the specific brutal grace of someone in shock who has decided the 200 guests in the room don't deserve to watch her fall apart too. And then she left with her sister before the cake was cut. We did not, technically, have a wedding night. We had a conversation that lasted until 4 in the morning, in which she asked me, over and over, some version of the same question. Not how could you, but who else have I married that I don't know about? And I did not have a clean answer for her, because the honest answer was that I didn't fully know either. That I'd spent 9 years so carefully not looking at it that I'd lost track of exactly how much of my adult life had been built on top of it. We did not divorce. I want to be honest that this wasn't inevitable, and it wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast. Grace moved out for 6 weeks. We went to therapy separately before we ever did it together. And in that 6 weeks, I did the only thing I could think of that wasn't another version of managing the story instead of fixing the actual damage. I found Ben. He was living 2 states away, working at 55 at a hardware distribution company, doing accounts work that had nothing to do with the career he'd spent 20 years building. I drove there without calling first because I was afraid that if I called, I'd let him say no, and some part of me needed to actually stand in front of him and say it, not send it through screen. He didn't let me in the house for almost 20 minutes. He stood on the porch, and he let me say everything. And when I finished, he said the sentence I think about more than any other sentence anyone has ever said to me. He said, 9 years is a very long time to let someone else carry something that was never theirs to carry. I'm not going to tell you he forgave me that day. He didn't. What I can tell you is what I did after, because I think it matters more than the apology itself. I spent the next several months using every professional relationship I'd built in the industry I'd never left, getting the actual, full record corrected. Not a quiet internal memo, but a real, published editor's note in the paper that had let him go, stating clearly that the editorial failure 9 years earlier belonged to the reporter, not the supervising editor, and naming me. It cost me things. 2 panels I was supposed to speak on quietly uninvited me. A colleague who trusted my version of the story for years stopped returning my calls. I am, professionally, a smaller and less impressive person now than I was the week before that wedding, and I have never once regretted that trade. I also did the harder, less public thing. I helped Ben, quietly and without announcing it to anyone, get back into freelance investigative work, connecting him with editors who owed me nothing but took the meeting because I asked, work that was entirely his talent and none of my doing, but that needed one door held open by someone the industry still, unfortunately, listened to. He's published 4 pieces in the last year. He told me, the last time we spoke, that it isn't the newsroom he lost, and it never will be, and that Nora and he are still not together, and that some debts don't have a version of repayment that actually closes them. He also told me he no longer crosses the street to avoid me at the one industry event we've both attended since, which he said, dryly, was not nothing. Grace came home after 6 weeks. Not because I'd fixed anything. Ben's career isn't fixed, his marriage isn't back. None of the actual damage from 9 years ago on happens because I finally said it out loud. She came home, she told me, because she'd spent 6 weeks watching what I did when nobody was forcing me to do anything anymore. The apology at the wedding was forced out of me by a woman with a microphone. Everything after that, Ben's porch, the correction, the months of quiet, unglamorous work with no audience and no credit. Nobody made me do any of that. She said that was the only evidence she had that the man she married wasn't only capable of being honest when he'd been caught. We are still married. It is not the marriage we would have had if Nora Whitfield had never stood up. I don't think either of us is under any illusion about that. There is a version of trust between us now that had to be rebuilt from a much lower floor than most marriages ever have to survive, and some nights it still shows. It's raining tonight, the same steady, ordinary rain that was falling the night my father toasted us, for minutes before everything I'd built came apart in front of 200 people. I think about Nora Whitfield often, not with anger, though I understand if you feel some on my behalf, or on hers. I think about the fact that she waited 9 years for one room, one microphone, 1 minute, because I had never given her or been anything else. I think about how much smaller that cost would have been if I'd simply said the true sentence in that conference room, in private, to 3 people, instead of letting a stranger say it for me, in public, to 200. People ask me, sometimes, if I regret what happened at my wedding. I don't. I regret every single day between the conference room and the reception hall that I spent letting someone else hold what was mine. The wedding didn't ruin anything. The wedding was just, finally, the room where the bill came due. If there's a version of the truth you've been letting someone else carry for you, I hope you find a quieter room to say it in than I did. But I'd rather you say it in a loud one than never say it at all.